The day we buried Caleb Christian, his mama was already measuring the house like it belonged to her. I saw her after the service, running her fingers along the back porch railing with those flat gray eyes moving slow across the property. Not grieving, appraising. And while the preacher's voice carried over that red clay cemetery and the rain came down cold, Caleb's kinfolk weren't bowed in mourning. They were whispering in clusters and cutting looks my way like I was the intruder at my own husband's funeral. I held my bobbies close through all of it. Josie was 8, Micah was 6, and little Benji had just turned 4. They pressed against my legs with their small hands gripping my skirt. I kept my eyes forward and my jaw set. Because standing there watching those people watch me, I knew something ugly was coming down the hill. I just didn't know yet that Caleb had already seen it coming, and had spent the last year of his life quietly making sure that when it arrived, I would be ready. They didn't wait 24 hours after the funeral. I was still in the black dress I wore to the cemetery when Darrell Christian's pickup came rumbling down the dirt road the very next morning. He knocked on the front door 3 times, hard, like the wood owed him something. Darrell was Caleb's older brother, wider in the shoulders, and had never once looked at me like a sister. He looked at me that morning like a problem he was about to solve. He said the house and land belonged to the Christian family, not some outsider widow, and I had better start thinking about packing. He said it standing in my doorway with my children eating cereal behind him. He didn't lower his voice, didn't look sorry. Something in his confidence told me this wasn't something he and Geraldine had cooked up overnight. They had been planning this. My name is Claire. Caleb had told me 3 weeks before he died that if certain people showed their true colors after he was gone, I should not panic. I had laughed it off. Standing in that doorway, I stopped laughing. 3 weeks before Caleb died, we were sitting on the porch after supper watching fireflies come up from the field below. The kids were in bed. The air was warm the way August can be, and Caleb had his hand resting on mine on the armrest. Then he asked me a strange question. He said, "If folks show their true colors after I'm gone, the real ugly kind, promise me you won't panic." I looked at him sideways and asked what on earth he was talking about. He gave me that small, quiet smile of his, the one that meant he was thinking 3 moves ahead. He said he had been taking care of some things, and that if anything happened, I needed to stay calm because the pieces were already in place. I told him he was being dramatic. He laughed a little and said maybe, but he didn't take it back. Now, standing in the house with Darrell's words hanging in the air, every syllable of that porch conversation came back loud and clear. Caleb had not been talking nonsense. He had been giving me a warning. They came back 2 days later with a sheriff and a paper I didn't understand. Darrell stood in the yard with his mama, Geraldine Christian, arms crossed, face set like concrete. The deputy looked uncomfortable the whole time, kept his eyes on the ground, but he handed me the eviction notice and explained I had a short window to vacate. I stood on that porch with 3 children behind me, and I will be honest, my legs wanted to buckle. But I kept standing. I told the children to stay inside, asked the deputy for a moment, and went to the bedroom to gather what I could, the kids' clothes, their school bags, papers from the lockbox, and Caleb's old work jacket off the hook by the door. We had poured 6 years of life into that house. Caleb had fixed the roof himself. We painted the kitchen the summer Benji was born. Now I was carrying it out in armloads while Darrell supervised from the yard. When I pulled on that jacket to haul a load to the truck, my hand touched something inside the lining, something that crinkled like paper when I pressed it. My husband had hidden something in that jacket, and it was not there by accident. I sat in the truck cab while the kids loaded in the back and carefully worked a small envelope out through a slit in the inner lining that had been hand-stitched back together. My name was on the front in Caleb's slanted, crooked handwriting, the handwriting I had teased him about for years because it looked like someone writing during an earthquake. Inside was a folded receipt and a small piece of notepaper. The note said in pressed, deliberate letters, "If they push you out, don't lose your head. Take this receipt to Miss Loretta at Valley Trust Bank on Sycamore Street. Tell her your name. She'll know what to do." That was everything. No dollar amount, no explanation. Just a receipt with a printed code number and the name of a banker at a branch in town I had never visited. I folded it carefully and pressed the envelope flat against my palm. Caleb never did a single thing without a reason. Whatever this was, he had placed it there on purpose. I was not going to waste it. That night, my 3 bobbies slept in the backseat of our rusted Chevy pickup in the parking lot of a closed grocery store on Route 9. I pushed the front seat forward to give them room and spread Caleb's jacket over them for warmth. Josie was old enough to know we weren't where we were supposed to be and kept asking me quiet questions until she finally fell asleep around midnight. Micah and Benji were out before 9. I sat in the driver's seat in the dark with that receipt in my hand, turning it over under the glow of the parking lot light. The printed code was 16 digits in 2 groups, and at the top was the Valley Trust Bank logo, faint and smudged with age. A date had been stamped on it from 11 months ago, around the same time Caleb's chest had first started bothering him. That was not a coincidence. He had felt something coming, whether his health or his family's intentions or both, and had moved quietly to build something before it arrived. First thing in the morning, we were going to that bank. When the banker saw Caleb's name on that receipt, her face went pale. Miss Loretta was a small woman in her late 60s with silver hair pinned back tight and reading glasses on a beaded chain. She took the receipt from me across the desk with professional calm, glanced at it, then went completely still. She looked up, then back down. Then she asked very quietly how I had come by it. When I told her Caleb Christian had passed away 6 days ago and had hidden it in the lining of his work jacket, she set the receipt on the desk, folded her hands on top of it, and stood up. She walked to her office door and turned the lock from the inside. Then she came back, sat down, and leaned across the desk close enough that I could see the moment something shifted in her expression, from professional to personal. She said she had known this day would come. She said Caleb had told her I might arrive under difficult circumstances and had asked her to take good care of me when I did. Then she said the words that made my heart slam hard. Your husband left something very important, and you need to see it before you do anything else. My husband had been preparing for betrayal for nearly a year. Miss Loretta explained this as she walked me through documents from a locked filing drawer. Caleb had opened a private account at Valley Trust 11 months before he died. No joint holder, no Christian family connection, nothing findable through ordinary channels. He had told Miss Loretta that under no circumstances was she to acknowledge the account's existence to anyone, except the woman who came in with the receipt and gave her name as Claire Christian. He had not been secretive out of dishonesty. He had been secretive out of protection. Caleb had grown up watching his family use property and money as weapons, and somewhere along the way he had decided that if anything happened to him, he would not leave me standing empty-handed in front of people who had been waiting for exactly that moment. Miss Loretta walked me out of her office and down a back hallway to a staircase leading to a lower level. She used a key from her chain to open a heavy door. We entered a vault room lined with numbered metal drawers along every wall. She stopped at drawer 114 and handed me the key. Inside that safety deposit box was something worth far more than money. There were land deeds, 6 of them, bundled in a rubber band, each representing a parcel of Christian property the family had always treated as theirs by tradition and handshake rather than recorded title. What Caleb had understood, and what the Christian family had never bothered to verify, was that handshake ownership means nothing once the paperwork changes. Over nearly 9 years, Caleb had quietly and legally purchased parcel after parcel, from elderly relatives who needed cash, from cousins who had moved away, from anyone willing to sell at a fair price. He had done it through Miss Loretta's bank with proper deeds recorded at the county courthouse. He had done it without raising the subject once at a family gathering or causing a single confrontation. He had just slowly, carefully, over a decade, bought the land his family assumed would always be theirs to control. According to the deeds in my hand, he now legally owned the majority of it. And legally, so did I. Caleb knew exactly how his family would treat me once he was gone. The letter in that box made it plain. It was 2 pages in his cramped handwriting on ruled notebook paper, dated 8 days before he died. He opened by calling me his Claire Bear, the nickname he had used since our first date, and that first line alone made me press my hand over my mouth to keep from breaking down right there in that vault. Wrote, "If they threw you out, let them have the moment. Folks that hungry for a win stop thinking straight, and that is when they make mistakes." He explained what he had done with the land and why. He said the Christian family had always believed that being loud and bold was the same thing as being right, and he had spent years letting them believe it. Then he wrote the last line. He said there was one more thing I did not know yet, and Miss Loretta would explain when the time came. He told me to trust her. He told me to trust myself, and he said I had always been stronger than I knew. While my children and I were sleeping in a truck and eating gas station food, the Christian family was celebrating. A kind neighbor named Ruth Ann Pickett called my cell to check on us and to let me know what was happening on the property. Darryl and Geraldine had started telling people in town that they had secured the house and land and were already in talks with a buyer. Geraldine had apparently called relatives to brag about it. Ruth Ann said the mood over there was somewhere between a reunion and a victory party. Darryl had been seen driving the old tractor around the property like it was already his, and Geraldine had reportedly told someone at church it was a blessing that Caleb's poor decisions had died with him. That last part landed like a stone. Because Caleb's supposed poor decisions included buying up their land parcel by parcel for nearly a decade, recording every deed at the courthouse, and establishing a trust in his wife's name that the Christian family did not know existed. They were celebrating a win they had not yet discovered was not theirs to claim. The property the Christian family evicted us from was not theirs to sell. That was the part that knocked the breath out of me each time I looked at the documents spread across the motel bed after we moved indoors from the cold. Miss Loretta's attorney, a quiet man named Mr. Hensley, walked me through the trust documents with careful patience. He showed me each deed, each recording date, each parcel on the county map. The house itself sat on a section Caleb had purchased outright from an elderly cousin named Earl Christian 3 years earlier. Earl had signed a proper deed, received fair payment, and the deed had been recorded at the county courthouse. No one had noticed because no one had been paying attention. When Darryl and Geraldine listed the property after throwing us out, they listed land that legally sat inside a trust bearing my name. They had accepted an offer, signed agreements, and taken a deposit from a young couple named the Harrisons, all without any legal authority to do so. Mr. Hensley looked at me over his glasses and said, very calmly, that this was going to be a significant problem for the Christians. The couple who bought the house showed up at the motel on a Thursday afternoon looking anything but happy. Kyle and Amber Harrison were in their late 20s, newly married, and had saved for years for a down payment on what they believed was their first home. Amber had a folder of paperwork clutched to her chest. They had received a letter from a title company flagging a problem with the deed chain, and somewhere in that process my name had surfaced attached to a trust holding the underlying ownership. They were not angry at me once I showed them the documents and explained everything from the beginning. They were furious at the Christians. Amber sat on the edge of the motel bed and read through Caleb's deeds carefully. When she finished, she looked up and said she was sorry about my husband and sorrier about what his family had done. Their attorney filed a complaint against Darryl and Geraldine within 48 hours. The deposit they had paid was now at the center of a legal dispute that was about to drag the Christian family into a situation they had not come close to preparing for. That is when the Christian family started calling. The first call came from a cousin I barely knew, speaking carefully about a possible misunderstanding regarding property lines. The second came from one of Darryl's sons, sounding stiff and rehearsed, asking if we could talk things over before they got complicated. The third came from Darryl himself, and the politeness had started wearing through. He said the whole thing was a mess, and we needed to figure it out like family. I let Mr. Hensley handle everything. He had instructed me early on not to negotiate directly with any Christian and to route all contact through his office. But Ruth Ann kept me updated, and by the end of that first week after the Harrisons filed their complaint, the calls had stopped being polite and started being frantic. The buyers were threatening a lawsuit. The title company had frozen the transaction. A real estate attorney had sent the Christians a formal demand letter. Darryl had spent 2 days trying to find a lawyer willing to take his case on short notice. The celebration was over. The hole was opening beneath their feet, dug entirely by their own hands. Geraldine Christian showed up at the motel on a Saturday morning carrying a pie. A real pie with lattice crust, still warm, like she had spent the morning baking it, and decided that would be the thing to fix what she had done. She was wearing her church clothes and her eyes were red-rimmed, and she told me standing in that doorway, pie extended in both hands, that she had been out of her mind with grief after losing Caleb, that she didn't mean any of it, and that family should not treat family this way. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I looked at the pie. Josie was at my elbow watching. I thought about the deputy standing in our yard. I thought about Benji's face when we loaded into that truck. I thought about the cold parking lot. I thought about Caleb's letter and the line that read, "Some folks will come back with soft words once they figure out what they lost. Just remember what they showed you first." I thanked Geraldine for the pie. I told her all conversations would need to go through my attorney, Mr. Hensley, whose card I already had ready because I had known this visit was coming. Caleb had not just protected the land. He had protected our entire future. That was what Miss Loretta had been waiting to tell me, and she said the time had come. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon after the kids were dropped at Ruth Ann's house, sat me across her desk the same as that first morning. But this time she had a different folder in front of her, thicker, with tabbed dividers, and she opened it with the hands of someone delivering news they have been holding for a long time. Caleb had maintained a second account alongside the trust, a private investment account he had been quietly feeding for over a decade from his mill wages. He lived simply and deliberately, no unnecessary spending, no flashy purchases, no explanation to anyone about where a portion of every paycheck went. He had started it the year we married as an emergency fund and just never stopped adding. Over time, he had worked with a financial advisor connected to the bank who helped him invest carefully and consistently. Miss Loretta told me she needed to prepare me before she showed me the balance. I told her I was prepared. I was not entirely prepared. My husband had left behind nearly $6 million. Not lottery money, not inherited money, not anything that came from a single lucky break. Quiet money, built the way Caleb built everything, slowly and without announcing itself. 11 years of mill wages set aside with discipline. 11 years of careful, consistent investing with a financial advisor who had helped compound the growth until what started as a safety net had become something extraordinary. Miss Loretta gave me a moment to sit with it. I stared at the number on that statement for a long time without speaking. Then I thought about the 6 years we had lived in that house with mismatched furniture and second-hand appliances and a truck that needed coaxing in cold weather. Caleb never complained, never acted like anything was missing. Because to him, nothing was. He was building something and he just didn't make it loud. When I found my voice, I asked why he had never told me. Miss Loretta said he wanted the money protected first, safely beyond the reach of anyone who might try to claim it, and then he was going to tell me everything over supper one evening in the fall. He had run out of fall. The Christian family hired a lawyer and tried to fight back. Their argument was that Caleb had been in a compromised mental state during the months he made his decisions, that his illness had affected his judgment, that he had been manipulated by outside parties, and that the trust should be contested on grounds of diminished capacity. It sounds reasonable until you examine what Caleb actually did and how he did it. Mr. Hensley had anticipated this because Caleb had anticipated it. Miss Loretta produced a video recording Caleb had made in her office 9 months before he died, at his own request, with her present as a witness. In the recording, he sat in the same chair I had sat in, looked directly at the camera, and calmly explained every legal decision he had made regarding the trust and the investment account, his reasons for each one, and his specific concerns about what might happen to his family after his death. He named no one directly. He didn't need to. He was articulate, precise, and unmistakably sound of mind. The judge reviewed the recording at the preliminary hearing. The diminished capacity argument was dismissed before it reached a full proceeding. In a small Appalachian town, secrets do not stay buried long. The truth about the Christian situation had been spreading through the community the way water moves through dry ground, quietly at first, then suddenly everywhere. Neighbors who had watched Darrell and Geraldine strutting around after the funeral began sharing their own stories. Ruth Ann told me people had been sitting on things for years, waiting for a moment when it felt safe to say them out loud. A man who had worked alongside Caleb at the mill for 8 years told anyone who would listen that Caleb was the most clear-headed person he had ever known. and that the idea of him being manipulated into anything was laughable. A woman who had sold one of the land parcels to Caleb came forward voluntarily and confirmed the sale had been entirely her own decision and that Caleb had paid her fairly. 2 county clerks confirmed all of Caleb's deed recordings had been processed through proper channels without irregularities. The picture forming in that town was not the one the Christian family had been painting. It was the one Caleb had been quietly building all along. The courtroom was packed on the day of the main hearing. Ruth Ann had told me people were talking, but I had not understood how much until I walked in and found every row filled. Neighbors, mill workers, church members, faces I recognized and many I didn't. Mr. Hensley sat beside me with his gray suit and his organized folders and the steady calm I had come to rely on the way you rely on solid ground when everything else is shifting. The judge was a woman named Judge Patricia Holt, and she ran her courtroom with brisk efficiency. At one point during Darrell's testimony, she interrupted his attorney and addressed Darrell directly. She asked him, in a voice that reached every corner of the room, whether he had evicted a widow and 3 minor children from a property before taking any steps to verify legal ownership. His attorney touched his arm. There was a long pause. Judge Holt waited. The courtroom was completely still. Whatever Darrell said into that silence, the damage was already done, because every person present had just watched a man hesitate at that question. His face had already answered it. Caleb had one last surprise inside the trust documents, and Mr. Hensley found it during his final review before the ruling. It was a clause, carefully worded and properly executed, buried 4 pages into the trust agreement. It stated that any party who had taken legal or physical action to dispossess the named trust beneficiary from the property, or who had attempted to contest the validity of the trust through litigation, would be permanently barred from any future claim to any portion of the land or assets held within the trust, through inheritance, marriage, or any subsequent legal proceeding. Mr. Hensley said he had seen protective clauses before, but that this one was unusually precise. It had clearly been written with specific people and specific scenarios in mind. Caleb had not just built a fence around what was ours. He had built a gate that locked automatically the moment anyone tried to force it open. By filing their lawsuit and contesting the trust, the Christian family had triggered that clause themselves. Every aggressive move they made to claim more had instead cost them everything. They had permanently and legally cut themselves off from any future share of anything Caleb had built. The ruling came down on a quiet Thursday morning. Judge Holt upheld the trust in its entirety. She found the eviction had been carried out unlawfully, that the subsequent property sale to the Harrisons had been conducted without legal authority, and that the Christian family's litigation had been without merit. She ordered the Christians to refund the Harrisons' full deposit with interest, pay all associated legal fees for both parties, and cover the costs of the title dispute resolution. Mr. Hensley's total came to just over $90,000 in obligations, money the Christian family did not have readily available, which meant they would be liquidating assets to cover it. The property was gone from their reach permanently under the trust clause Caleb had written. The land that had always carried the Christian name now belonged to me and my children, locked in a trust protected for the next generation. Darrell sat at their table at the end of the proceedings with his elbows on his knees and his head down. Geraldine sat beside him with the face of a woman who had finally run out of moves. They had overplayed every card they held against a man who had already decided the outcome years before they sat down. The day we moved back onto the land felt entirely different from any day I had spent there before. The house was the same porch boards, same creak on the second step, same view of the lower field from the kitchen window, but something in the air around it had changed. Or maybe I had changed. Ruth Ann and 3 neighbors came to help carry boxes, and there was food on the counter within an hour, and children's voices moving through the rooms in a way that pushed out every dark thing that had settled there while we were gone. Josie ran straight to the backyard and did a full lap around the garden fence like she was reclaiming territory. Micah carried his own box from the truck without being asked, his small face serious and focused. And little Benji, who had stood in this same yard watching strangers shove our furniture onto the grass, found the patch of bare dirt near the porch where his toy trucks had always parked, crouched down, and started pressing flower seeds into the ground one at a time with his thumb. He had been carrying them in his coat pocket the whole time we were at the motel. He had been waiting for the ground to be ours again. Caleb didn't just leave us money and land. That was the thing I kept returning to in the weeks after we came home, sitting on the same porch where he had asked me to promise I wouldn't panic. He had left us something no court document could fully capture, proof that a quiet man who never raised his voice, never made threats, and never once bragged about what he was building could outthink and outlast every person who had ever underestimated him. He left the children a father's example laid out in deeds and documents and a recorded video, a blueprint for how a person builds something that lasts. He left me a reminder, written in his own hand, that kindness and strategy are not opposites, that you can love people honestly and still protect yourself clearly. That patience, applied with purpose, is the most powerful thing in any room. For the first time since I had stood in the rain at that cemetery, I did not feel like a woman who had lost everything. I felt like a woman who had just understood what she had actually been given, and I intended to honor it. Months later, on a Tuesday evening in early October, Darrell Christian drove his pickup slow along the road that runs past the front of the property. I was on the porch with a cup of coffee watching the last light come off the hills. Josie was inside doing homework. Micah and Benji were somewhere in the yard, their voices carrying on the cool air. Darrell's truck crept at the speed of a man looking at something he used to own inside his head. He didn't pull in. He didn't stop. He didn't wave. He just looked at the house from the road and then drove on. I watched his taillights disappear around the curve, and I thought about what Caleb had written about folks needing to dig their own hole before they fall in it. I thought about the pie on the motel doorstep. I thought about the eviction paper in the yard and the rain on the red clay cemetery. And I thought about Benji pressing flower seeds into the ground with his small thumb on the day we came home. That is the thing about greed, in these hills or anywhere else. It is loud and sure of itself right up until the moment the quiet truth walks through the door. And the table, it turned out, had been set by Caleb all along.